It doesn't matter where greenhouse gas is emitted. It has the same negative effect for the whole world. Greenhouse gases are going in the atmosphere and they're trapping heat, which affects the average temperature of the globe. By the same token, it doesn't matter where you reduce emissions. It has the same positive effect on climate change for the whole world.
Hello, welcome to People, Planet, Profit, a podcast by EarthUP, where we aim to help businesses and people like you simplify sustainability. EarthUP CEO Stephen Bay will be joined by experts, innovators, and lifelong adventurers to break down some of today's biggest topics affecting the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits. What does a sick building do to your health? Why should corporations be invested in biodiversity? How can I help create better working conditions and happier employees at my company? We'll cover these questions and so much more in a candid conversation about reshaping work culture into a landscape that prioritizes people and planet without sacrificing profit. Our next episode starts right now.
Hey, it's Stephen Bay, CEO of EarthUP. Today's episode features Dan Linsky from ClimeCo. I'm excited to learn more about greenhouse gas emissions and different carbon offset initiatives that we can support to reduce our environmental impact. But first, Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at ClimeCo.
I'm Dan Linsky. I'm the VP of Voluntary Markets at ClimeCo, and we are a carbon offset company. We develop and manage carbon emission reduction projects here in North America. We offer those carbon reductions as carbon offsets to companies and organizations that are looking for ways to reduce their carbon footprint and maybe can't reduce it within their own borders down to the level they want. So they'll support our projects, our carbon emission reductions by buying those carbon offsets that come from those projects.
Very cool. And so how did you end up as the VP of Voluntary Markets?
The founder of this company, of ClimeCo, Bill Flutterback, and I worked at a company together back in the mid-2000s that was really a pioneer in the carbon offset market. That company developed about 300 digester projects, in other words, capturing methane from manure lagoons at dairies, at big dairies, and capturing that, converting it to energy in some cases, but making sure that methane didn't go in the atmosphere. And we would sell those carbon reductions to companies in Europe that were under a compliance program and could use those offsets as part of their compliance. Fast forward a few years, Bill Flutterback starts his own company to do the same thing in the United States. He very successfully implemented a few projects that captured N2O emissions, and at a certain point needed somebody to offer those to the market. He called me because I did that at our previous company and said, Dan, I know you've done this in the past. What are some tips? What's some advice you can give us so that we can, market these offsets? And I said, here's your tip, Bill, hire me. And so, so that's how I came to be, over time, the VP of Voluntary Markets at ClimeCo.
And so you mentioned N2O. These are greenhouse gases. Can you kind of explain what all these terms mean and what it means to companies?
Yeah, so a greenhouse gas is a gas that traps heat in the atmosphere. So the heat comes in simple terms, it comes in, and usually a lot of it bounces off the earth and goes back out into space. But we actually need some greenhouse gases to trap that heat so that we can live here on Earth. But if too much gas gets trapped, it heats the earth too much. And that's the situation we find ourselves in right now because of the man-made emissions that are being emitted and trapping too much heat. Some of those gases, it's all measured in carbon dioxide equivalents. So carbon dioxide is like the dollar bill in our U.S. financial system. Everything is, I can have a $100 bill in my hand, but that's all relative to the dollar. It's worth 100 of those dollars. So other greenhouse gases besides CO2 are methane, let's say. So methane traps about 23 times more heat than carbon dioxide does. So if you reduce a ton of methane from going into the atmosphere, it's like reducing 23 tons of carbon dioxide.
And so you guys use carbon offsets as a way to just simplify it. Instead of having 100 different ways to explain the gases you're reducing, you equate it to a metric ton of carbon dioxide. And that's what you guys use as carbon offsets. And that's kind of what carbon offsets mean.
That's right. That's exactly right. So a carbon offset is 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide reduced from going into the atmosphere or sequestered, in other words, pulled out of the atmosphere.
So this leads us to, why do companies care about this?
I think there's two reasons. One is that they want to do the right thing. So there's some companies out there that have always been environmental first. And so they want to do the right thing, and they either like to support a certain project or project type by buying the carbon offsets that come from that project, or they'd love to be able to be zero emissions within their own borders, right? Not to emit any greenhouse gases, but some companies just can't get there. They've done all they can, or maybe they'll get there 20 years from now as technology changes, but they can't get there yet. And they'd like to be carbon neutral. In other words, do no harm. So they'll reduce what they can in-house, and then they'll buy those carbon offsets to support reductions elsewhere that they can't seem to make happen within their border. The second reason, while still great for the environment, I think is because they're getting some shareholder pressure or some investor pressure that says, hey, if you don't address your greenhouse gas emissions, then we're not going to invest in your company. Or we think it's going to hurt your share price. And so the shareholders are putting some pressure on companies to do something about their greenhouse gas emissions.
And some of those entities that are providing that pressure, like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who recently wrote a letter about offsetting emissions and investing in biodiversity, I think that's really important as we start to look at how companies are navigating their impact and the environmental, social, and corporate governance, or what a lot of companies and investors call ESG.
So I only took the carbon part of it, but you're absolutely right. It's going beyond carbon for some of those pressures for other social aspects as well.
One of the things that came out of 2020 was, I think it was a tipping point. You have pressure from the investors, which you need to really drive action from companies, but you also have the pressure from consumers and employees, right? So you're starting to get these external pressures and internal pressures across all the areas, and this is going to really accelerate the adoption of ESG and companies really starting to breed it into their culture and not just be this thing that they focus on for, greenwashing. What's ClimeCo doing now? What do you kind of see for the future of ClimeCo and what you guys are working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, we are really have had from our customers an increase in demand for total ESG consulting with our expertise in project development and in not only carbon emission reductions, but also VOC reductions and NOx. We are also, for the first time, really investing in forestry. We are very heavily involved in a reforestation project. We've mostly been on the industrial side of greenhouse gas emission reductions through our refrigerant collection program and, of course, our big projects at nitric acid plants that reduce N2O. The reforestation project down in the Gulf of Mexico along the Mississippi River it's incredible. It's needed. The co-benefits for the wildlife there and biodiversity and flood control and all that. It's a different beast than the industrial project. I love both types of projects, but it's really cool to see us digging into reforestation as a lot of clients are asking for projects that draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Not only projects that stop it from going into the atmosphere, but also projects that draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
I saw a picture recently of you and Nancy, the head of the VP of Marketing for you guys. Nancy had some cute pink boots on, and because we're waist deep in mud. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
I was a riot, man. So I wanted to go. It's much easier for me to talk to clients about the project if I have visited the project. And so I asked if I could go at the next tree planting. We're doing 4,000 acres to be done by the end of the year. Planting ball cypress, which is a native tree to that area, in the swamps. And I do mean it's the swamps. I found planting the trees the easy part. Then you have to walk 20 feet through the swamp before you plant the next tree. And that turned out to be the hard part. The guy told me that was kind of showing me how to do it. And he says, so if you fall, if you can, try to fall backward. And I hope you brought a change of clothes. So I had these waders on that came up all the way up to my hips. Nancy had these rain boots on that came up about just above her ankles pretty much, maybe the mid shin, and she took a few steps where she went down to her hips. And one of them, when she pulled her foot up, I was holding her and she pulled her foot up and her boot didn't come up with it. So it just got all sunk in with mud. But that's, what a great thing. These guys are 4,000 acres of that to go through that in order to not only sequester carbon, a lot of carbon over 100 years, but also, the wildlife there, to protect the wildlife and the flood control.
You talked about two real big ways to stop carbon, right? One's stopping it from getting out there, and the other one is capturing it once it gets out there. And something that you've told me since the first time I met you, the goal is to stop it from getting out there first and then reduce it. Be efficient. Don't just pour it out there and expect that we can pull it out, which is great. And I know that refrigerant is a huge issue, right? When people get rid of the refrigerators, and if the refrigerant gets out, that's a huge issue. So you see utility companies have these fridge programs and things which are needed. But the thing that's kind of more fun to talk about, and the thing that I'm really excited to talk about, is the biodiversity impacts of a lot of these carbon offset programs. People think carbon offsets and they just imagine, at least me when I first did, burning methane over a landfill. When you actually look at the implications of some of these carbon offset programs, how it actually makes the landscape more resilient to floods, more resilient to these things. You increase biodiversity. There's more land for a lot of animals to live. And I know that you're doing something out in Seattle too with salmon. Have you been getting kind of increasing pressure from companies around helping focus on biodiversity and also doing these offset programs like in their own backyard so they have kind of like community connection to it?
There's two different types of buyers out there, as you'd expect. One wants the least expensive carbon offset they can get so they can check the box and go on their way. And I don't think that's a bad thing to some extent. I kind of look at it like term insurance and whole life insurance. Right? if what you're buying insurance for is to protect you against financial loss, then buy term insurance. If you want the insurance to protect you against financial loss, also investing for your retirement and blah, 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 then you buy whole life. It's the same with carbon offset projects. If all you want to do is reduce 1 ton of carbon, all carbon offsets that are on a reputable registry do that. So if that's all you want, then you should buy the least expensive offset you can. If you want to support projects that also have other benefits, which is also a good idea, especially if there's something you're really passionate about, then these projects you should look into what are the benefits besides carbon dioxide reductions or greenhouse gas reductions that come along with that project. There's a really cool project type, mostly in Africa right now and a few other countries, for cook stoves. So these mostly ladies have to go into the forest, cut wood to bring back to burn in their stoves to cook dinner. And usually it's inside their homes. There's these efficient cook stoves, some are even solar cook stoves that are being supplied to these people now so that they don't have to go down and cut down trees. But the health benefits, imagine burning wood inside of your home, what you inhale. That's a really nice project with a very, very important co-benefit.
What you're kind of saying too is if a company really wants to tackle ESGs, they can do a lot of that through carbon offset programs too, right? You can solve environmental issues, you can solve social issues just by the carbon offset projects you choose and how you choose to mitigate the carbon that you're putting out there in the atmosphere.
Right.
What's your favorite project that either that your team has worked on or that you've heard of?
I think it's the N2O project. As far as the carbon emission reduction goes, it's bulletproof. Reforestation project is great as long as the trees survive and they don't burn down. And that's a risk you take with a forestry project. Because of all the other benefits and because of how much carbon they sequester, you take that risk, and there's buffer pools that, make up for lost trees, all that kind of thing. But the N2O project, we go in and we put a catalyst in to the airflow system at a nitric acid plant. In that airflow system, one of the waste products of a nitric acid plant is N2O, or nitrous oxide. It just goes out the stack. It's not regulated. So these companies do not have to reduce their N2O emissions. But if they choose to put the technology in, then we just put a catalyst into the airflow system. There's a lot more to it than that, but basically it's a catalyst that goes into the airflow system. And as that air, which has N2O in it, flows over that catalyst, it breaks the N2O down into N2 and O2, which are components of the air we breathe. Those are not dangerous gases. Just breaks it down into N2 and O2. So the N2O is destroyed. There's no chance of it coming back. And we actually measure the N2O into the system and out of the system every minute. It's bulletproof. We have some great clients who buy that because they're voluntarily reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. They do not want anybody to be able to poke holes in what they're doing, something that they're trying to do good, and then they end up with bad press because the greenhouse gas was suddenly emitted 10 years later or something like that. So I like the bulletproofness and this data-driven product that comes out of the nitric acid plants, the N2O abatement project. On the flip side, if I had the chance to go visit a cook stove project in Africa and see the difference that it made in those people's lives, I think that, I know about it, but I think when you see it and you meet the people and you talk to them about the difference, that would become my favorite project. There's something about if you can never visit one or get there.
You're kind of highlighting the importance of having a variety of different types of offset projects in your strategy. Don't just go after one. There's a variety of different ways, just like if you're balancing your investments. You can kind of look at this as a full investment portfolio for companies. Companies should look at what's the high risk ones, what are the low risk ones, what are the ones that are going to just yield benefits year in, year out, and then what are the ones that might have a bigger social or biodiversity impact, and how do we want to kind of break our strategy down to really hit those different pieces?
Yeah, it's a great, very, very good point.
Can you talk about the difference between pollution and emissions? Because pollution is kind of very specific to certain areas, right? We hear about Beijing and these areas when we have, I live on the West Coast, so we experience a lot of fires now.
That's a good point. And I'll keep the conversation to greenhouse gas emissions because some other emissions are different. They are more regional. But greenhouse gas emissions, it's a global pollution. It doesn't matter where greenhouse gas is emitted. It has the same negative effect for the whole world. Greenhouse gases are going in the atmosphere and they're trapping heat, which affects the average temperature of the globe. By the same token, it doesn't matter where you reduce emissions. It has the same positive effect on climate change for the whole world. It may locally have other benefits, but as far as the reduction of greenhouse gases, it's a global benefit. Unlike if I'm a chemical plant and I dump all my waste into the river, that doesn't affect anybody in Russia, but it does affect the folks in my local community. So that's kind of the difference between a pollution or a local pollution versus greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why offsets work so well for greenhouse gas emissions. For a second, forget about the co-benefit. You can go and do a project wherever it's the least expensive to reduce that 1 ton of carbon emissions. And it has the same effect as if you went and spent the most amount of money to reduce a ton of carbon, because it's global.
Yeah.
It affects global.
It makes it easy for consumers to just understand a metric ton of emissions is a metric ton of emissions. There's a bunch of co-benefits when you start looking at your social and your environmental impacts. But when it comes to climate change, 1 metric ton is equal to 1 metric ton. And it doesn't matter where in the world, it doesn't matter what are the other co-benefits. It doesn't matter least expensive, most expensive, things like that. There's companies, and I know Elon Musk and Bill Gates recently said that they're going to commit to pulling carbon out of the air mechanically. They have, a geothermal plant in Iceland that pulls these things out of the air and it turns it into rocks and so on. And so to your point, it makes a lot of sense if it pulls metric tons out of it. But I just would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that technology.
One, I think it's fantastic that somebody can come up with an idea like that. It's very expensive right now. I think over time it'll come down, but it's very, very expensive per ton. Compared to other ways to reduce or sequester carbon.
I think it's like $150 to $200 per metric ton or something like that.
Right, which is at least 10 to 20 times more, which doesn't sound much if it's 1 ton, but if it's 1 million tons, that's a lot of money, right? So that's one thing. But I'm very impressed that the technology even exists. I mean, think about that. That's pretty amazing. It scares me a little in that, what if they take too much? And I think that would take a long time to happen. When do they know when to stop? So I do think it's amazing technology. It could be really fantastic.
Do other offset projects have similar risks? Like if you plant too many trees, right?
I don't think so.
What are some of the other projects? There's making sure refrigerant doesn't escape. There's N2O. There's planting trees. There's cook stoves. What are some of the other types of projects that you know about and you kind of have been involved in?
Of course, there's renewable energy projects, solar and wind projects that replace the use of fossil fuels. Those projects can either go 2 directions. They can either create renewable energy credits or they can create carbon offsets. Can't do both. Obviously, that'd be what they call double dipping. But there is some really good wind and solar projects and hydro projects that go the carbon offset route. And usually they decide which way to go depending on financially which market is better right now. So if RECs are selling at a higher price than carbon offsets, they'll produce RECs and vice versa. There's renewable energy projects. One of the really early and still going strong types of projects are dairy projects and hog farm projects where those big manure lagoons from all those animals, methane just bubbles, just going up. And so the digesters cover that. There's different ways to do it, but basically they cover that lagoon and trap the methane. And now most of the projects convert that methane to power that they sell back to the grid. It's a great project. And some of them have even evolved beyond carbon offset projects and are now producing natural gas, renewable RNG, renewable natural gas. And once again, it depends on which market they can make more money on.
That's incredible. So they're actually taking cow poop and they're able to actually power people's homes with the gas that comes off.
Absolutely, because there's a big push now for not only natural gas but renewable natural gas.
This leads into the triple bottom line that we're talking about. I mean, I think this is a great segue because it shows that by solving problems like methane release from cow poop can actually lead to more profit. And it's the whole circular economy people talk about. And that's possible with carbon offsets too. Things like this allow people to become efficient. When you say sustainability, a lot of people think of the environment, but sustainability just means like long lasting and resilience. And it's like using resources we have to the best of our ability so that we still have them for a long time. So this goes to the people, profit, planets. How do some of these projects impact people, the planet, and profits from a corporate standpoint?
Yeah, great question. On the project side, right, the companies that are implementing projects, they're able to do good for the environment in a time that they probably wouldn't do these projects if it wasn't for the revenue of the carbon offset. And in most cases, the revenue from the carbon offsets is a criteria of it being even able to produce carbon offsets. In other words, if this project would never happen without the revenue from the carbon offsets, then it's an okay project.
Can you explain a specific scenario of that?
Yeah, so let's say let's take the N2O plant. Very, very, very expensive projects to implement. Millions of dollars to implement, and they're not regulated for N2O. So there's no reason financially for them to do it. They can't charge more for the fertilizer that they produce because they put this project on. There's no financial incentive for them to do this project without the revenue from the carbon offsets to kind of make up the costs of implementing the project and the ongoing operational costs. They probably wouldn't do the project. It's great for the environment, and the reason it will happen is because they can recoup the money by selling the carbon offset. So that, as far as the project side, that's one way. Do environmental good without, losing millions of dollars of money by doing it. But on the folks that buy the carbon offsets, purchasing carbon offsets usually isn't an investment that you say, okay, I'm going to make money on this by purchasing carbon offsets. But if it means that you get the investment that you need, because now people will invest in your company, firms will invest in your company, if it means that you can attract the workforce that you want to attract, because, when I got out of college in the 80s and somebody actually gave me a job and was going to give me a paycheck, I didn't have any questions for that guy, right? I'm like, thank you very much. I'll get right to work, sir. Now, and thank God they do it, but the generation coming out of college now, they want to know, what are you doing about the environment? What are you doing about social issues? What are you doing about, some of these things that are in the news? But what are you doing about these issues? Because now I have a choice of where I go to work, and these issues are important to me, and I'm not going to work for a company that doesn't believe like me. Whether what I believe is right or wrong, it's a matter of the right place for me to work is in a culture that kind of shares my beliefs. So you can attract the workforce that you want to attract by making sure, because they're going to ask you, what are you doing about these social issues?
That makes a lot of sense. And, they don't jeopardize their supply chains too, I would imagine, right? If you're able to help combat climate change, you see some of this stuff. It's just, I heard somebody explain it one time, and they said, we don't know exactly the effects of climate change, but it's like when you put a pot of soup on the stove. We know it's going to bubble. We don't know exactly where it's going to bubble. We know it's going to splash out of the pan eventually. We don't know exactly where it's going to splash out of the pan, right? But that's going to happen because we're turning the heat up. So I think that's a great
analogy. I hadn't heard that, but it's very visual. I get it.
When you talked about talent acquisition, and I think you hit the nail on the head as far as one of the main forces driving companies to do this. They want to hire the brightest and the smartest people, and they also want to retain those employees. We've seen employees bounce around companies way, way more. How do you kind of see the corporate sustainability movement or corporate ESG movement really evolving from where we're at in 2021 to the future in order to kind of retain this talent? And how do you kind of see that landscape evolving?
Tough question, but the changes we've seen recently, and I think they're really good changes, being more transparent about what you're doing environmentally. If you're buying offsets, being transparent about these are the types of offsets that we've chosen, and this is why we chose them. It's still up to the company, it's their decision, but being the transparency behind it so that there's no possibility of greenwashing. Greenwashing meaning, okay, we're going to say we're doing this, but it's just for PR or it's just a show. We're not really doing anything. Companies now, I think the main changes they really want to know what they're buying, and they want to be transparent about it to the shareholders, to the public. So those are changes that we've seen on the buying of carbon offsets to make up for the emissions that you can't reduce on your own. There's been a big push over the last year to be net zero. Who would have thought that right there in the Pacific Northwest, there would be an arena called the Climate Pledge Arena? If you'd told me that 5 years ago, the Climate Pledge Arena, instead of Amazon putting their name on the arena, Amazon Arena, the name is Climate Pledge Arena. That's amazing to me.
So what would be some advice that you would give to a sustainability department when it comes to this, from all your expertise on how they approach this, how they approach engaging employees, engaging shareholders, and really being able to be transparent?
One thing, don't make any claims that aren't true. Don't try to overcomplicate or overstate what you're doing. So I try to temper my clients to, if anything, understate. Try to be as accurate as you can. Try to make it as easy for people to understand what you did without trying to make it seem like it's more than what you really did. It's something that people can definitely visualize and understand, but don't try to make it grandiose.
Have customers of your guys' been asking for certain types of offset projects, more local offset projects, anything like that?
one of the most often requested is local. And so it's either going to be the state that they're in, or at least the country that they're in, or the part of the country. Pacific Northwest is a great example of that, since you're in Seattle. The Pacific Northwest, there's not a lot of carbon offset projects there, but a lot of companies that are from there, and there's a lot of great companies in the Pacific Northwest, would first, if they're available, take offsets from projects that are located in the Pacific Northwest. They would even pay more money in most cases for those offsets in order to be able to say we're supporting a local project. And by doing that, we're putting local people to work on those projects and any other co-benefits that go along with it. But then next after that is the country, in most cases, state, region, country. And so I have a lot of clients in Europe that purchase offsets from projects in the United States because that company has an installation here in the United States. So for part of their offset portfolio, they would like to represent where their installations are. A portion of what they do for offsetting their emissions, they want offset projects from the United States because they have a presence here in the United States.
Is this something that you would recommend companies kind of focus on, is supporting local? And how do you think that companies can really help promote sustainability through their company culture in general?
That's a great question. I think in fact, one of the things that EarthUP does, I don't think you asked the question in order for me to bring up EarthUP, but I will. I think one of the things that EarthUP has taught me is to get the employees involved, really find out what are their passions as a whole. Are they passionate about the environment? If they're working from home, are they passionate about air quality? And can the company help me with that now that I'm working at home? Right? That's a local and really within the company great benefit if a company will do that. Can they help me reduce my emissions now that I have my office lights on all day because I'm working at home? And EarthUp's really taught me a lot about corporate culture as far as not only carbon goes, but sustainability in general, diversity and air quality in the home, and maybe a definition of local is within your workforce and not just geographically.
Well, thank you for the plug there.
It wasn't planned, but it's true. I mean, you guys have taught me a lot.
ClimeCo was one of our prototype customers, and we had a lot of fun with you guys too. Yeah. So,
well, we've reached our quick hitter section. I'll ask you a quick question. You give me a quick answer. So what gets you up in the morning?
Oh, well, I'm almost 60, so I just wake up early now. And because I work from home, I grab a cup of coffee and get to my desk, and I'm usually working between 5 and 6 a.m. because I'm awake. If you'd asked me that when I was 23, it would be a different answer, but I just wake up early now. But I do have a pretty hard stop every day at 5 o'clock.
And then you also answered the second question, which is, what is your breakfast beverage? When you wake up
Coffee.
At 5:30 in the morning, coffee?
So my first cup is black coffee, and then my next 2 cups have a shot of espresso in it.
I thought you were going to say a shot of something else.
No.
What is a book that you would recommend, top book when it comes to understanding carbon offsets?
On the subject of carbon offsets, I guess it's not really a book, but a report that comes out every year called the State of the Voluntary Carbon Market. It's a great report. There's a lot of work that goes into it in collecting data, but it also explains how the carbon market works, different project types. A really well-written report. It's a 30 or 40-page report, but it's probably the best thing you can read about the voluntary carbon market out there.
What would you recommend people do in their daily routine that people would be surprised to find out is actually like eco-friendly?
I think doing the easy stuff, right? You don't have to be extreme environmentalist to do a lot of good things for the environment. Turn the water off while you're brushing your teeth. Turn the water off while you're shaving. Make sure the air pressure in your tires are up to where the PSI that they're supposed to be, because if they're low, you have to use more gas to get to where you're going. And so you emit more carbon. So, there's some really simple things that we can all do that really have a big impact over time on the environment that are easy. And if you start there and you start seeing some of the benefits of that, maybe a lower water bill, that's nice over a year or two's time.
I would love to hear some sort of plug about ClimeCo. What is one thing that you're really excited about?
We've already talked about the reforestation project in Mississippi, but I think it's about that project is using a new methodology called the Climate Forward program. Most reforestation projects don't ever happen for carbon offsets. Think about planting a tree now. How big does it have to get before it really absorbs a decent amount of carbon? Good 8 to 10 years before it's even worth checking. This Climate Forward program allows you to receive the carbon offsets up front, so that if you do a reforestation project, once the trees are planted and then a year after it gets verified to make sure that the trees are still living, you get carbon offsets up front in order to monetize those. Otherwise, you have to wait 10 to 12 years before you can get any carbon offsets to monetize, and nobody does those projects because that doesn't fit the rate of return that they're looking for.
That's awesome, because I think that you will see, once again, we talked about the acceleration earlier in the call. I think that's going to accelerate a lot of these different programs, support biodiversity, do a lot of the good. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I could talk with you all day, but thank you for joining us. We're excited to work with ClimeCo moving forward, and have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Take care.
And that's our episode. If you'd like more info about what Dan Linsky is doing at ClimeCo, visit climeco.com. That's ClimeCo.com. EarthUP's new platform that simplifies sustainability for companies and communities is now live. To jump into the platform and start making change at home and work, go to app.earthup.eco. Become an early adopter and help us create an easier, more effective, and more fun platform for our community. Thank you so much for listening in and for your support. If you like our show, hit that subscribe button, tell a friend, and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Your support helps us reach a wider audience, so thank you. To learn more about EarthUp and our journey to simplifying sustainability, visit earthup.eco and follow EarthUp on LinkedIn.